Hello, everybody. As F.A. said, my name is Ashli Akins, and I'm a PhD student in interdisciplinary studies at the Liu Institute for Global Issues, combining anthropology, law, and environmental studies. So I have passed around a few textiles for you to look at. They'll be coming from the back towards the front. And these were woven by indigenous Quechua women in Peru who live in remote subsistence communities over 4,000 meters above sea level, deep in the Andean mountains near Machu Picchu. And these textiles are hand-woven by memory on backstrap looms with knowledge that has been passed down generation after generation from elder to youth. They are made with alpaca or sheep fiber and dyed with plants and other natural pigments from the region. The symbols embedded in these weavings tell a story. To me, these textiles act as a history book, a way for the Quechua women to tell their own stories with their hands and their hearts, which is especially important at a time when their stories are so well documented by outsiders, but so rarely heard through their own voices. Once I learned how to read these textiles, I learned a new language. One of my favorite symbols is the hummingbird in the bottom right there, the kente, two birds feeding one another, which means reciprocity and rebirth for new life. Though these textiles have been a cultural cornerstone for centuries, they are now struggling to stay alive as machine-made synthetic knockoffs flood marketplaces. Weavers cannot sell their products for fair prices, for a price that actually embeds the traditional knowledge, the skills, and the time that it takes to keep this tradition alive. And many youth don't want to be associated with being Quechua for fear that they will have less educational and employment opportunities due to discrimination. I have been working with Quechua weavers in the Andean mountains for the past 11 years. A few years ago, during a community meeting that I was facilitating for Moscoy, the charitable organization that I work with, some weavers thought it would be a good idea to create an authenticity certificate to increase the value of their products and to teach consumers the difference between the real product and those which were the knockoffs. I remember having a conversation with my colleague at the time, and we both thought it sounded like a great idea, but that it was actually a huge undertaking and much more complex than our small grassroots organization could actually handle at the time. I remember saying, man, we would actually need to hire a doctoral student to take that on. So, years later, here I am. As part of my research, I will be undergoing a feasibility study to see if such a thing could actually exist. A collective, community-owned authenticity certification process, which could be specific to a particular cultural heritage or tradition like the Quechua textiles. The complexity comes in when you begin asking the questions. What is authenticity? Who gets to decide? Which adaptations of cultural heritage would be considered authentic and which wouldn't? What if one community disagrees with another? For example, one community that I work with still shears their own alpacas and spins their fiber by hand using a push spindle. But the other communities along that same mountain range no longer have access to alpacas, and so they purchase machine-spun fiber. So I will be examining these types of questions through a variety of methodologies, including multi-stakeholder interviews and surveys. To ground this a bit for you, textiles are one of many forms that are officially defined internationally as intangible cultural heritage. So intangible cultural heritage is essentially anything that is traditional knowledge passed down through generations, often orally, that is important for a culture. So this could include language, music, poetry, visual art, dance, theater, rituals, ceremonies, legends, fairy tales, things like that. Cultural heritage is threatened around the world and continues to decline. The Quechua textile tradition is but one of many examples. In the Himalayas, for example, traditional Tibetan medicine faces dichotomies between its traditional local medicine and commodified standardized forms on the global marketplace. Here in Canada, First Nations communities face similar threats to their languages and arts every single day. These questions are part of a much larger inquiry regarding collective intellectual property rights. Laws were set up in a capitalist society in and for a primarily Western context, which sees human rights as individual rights. But cultural heritage, like many concepts that stem from indigenous worldviews, are seen through a collective lens. So how then can we use these policies in a way that can actually protect cultural heritage on the ground level? Though the aim of my research is to safeguard cultural heritage against threats of disappearance, and especially in the face of power imbalances, I am cautious that many safeguarding mechanisms inadvertently stagnate cultural heritage. They museumify traditions, putting them on a shelf to be preserved in a static, archaic form. So by protecting tradition, there is often little room for adaptation, for living heritage to breathe, as its culture and community adapts, grows, and develops. Cultural heritage is part of a human community, which means it naturally adapts so that it can be more resilient in the face of challenges. This is how all systems, all cultures evolve, to be less vulnerable to threats. However, not all adaptations are healthy, and many adaptations are imposed on communities and artists. Community agency, so choice, vote, and decision-making power, plays a large role in navigating that complex question of adaptation. There are dozens of laws and legislations that safeguard cultural heritage internationally. However, many of these safeguarding mechanisms aren't actually felt locally at the community level. From my experience, the producers that I work with care much more about the market and the consumers. This is where they feel that concrete change can actually happen. So after researching the legal side of safeguarding mechanisms in my master's degree, I am now wanting to look at consumer values and how consumers themselves can act as safeguarding mechanisms for cultural heritage. Travelers often ask me, where can I go to buy authentic textiles? Where can I go to actually support the artists? So as one of my many community outputs, I will be designing a free tourist map of the region, which will be available to travelers in print and online, featuring the key distributors that sell authentic products. I'm partnering with a network of NGOs to update the map on an annual basis to ensure its relevance and comprehensiveness after I graduate. I have also been working in collaboration with graphic artist Lydia Beauregard to produce a booklet documenting the story of the textile, which will accompany all textiles that consumers buy from one of my partnering NGOs, Moscoi's Peruvian Textiles, so that the embedded value of cultural heritage is better understood by the consumer. Though I will primarily be working with Petra Weavers, I will also be working with artists in 3 other satellite sites around the world to see how other communities have responded and adapted to these global challenges. This is a global problem. It's a phenomenon that I hear from so many artists and culture bearers around the world who believe in their cultural heritage so much, but who also want to participate in the changes and the development that they see in their communities. They simply want to do so in their own way, with agency and with choice. Before I conclude, I would like to acknowledge the scholarships that have supported my research: the Vanier Canada Graduate Scholarship, the Faculty of Graduate Studies and the Public Scholars Initiative, the Lou Institute for Global Issues, and my program, the Interdisciplinary Studies Graduate Program. I would also like to acknowledge the support of my supervisors, Dr. Wade Davis and Dr. Kai Chan, as well as my committee members, Dr. Mark Turin and Dr. Nancy Turner. I would especially like to thank my partner organization, Moscoi, and the weavers who have embarked upon this research with me in the communities of Amaru, Parobamba, Pituquisca, Cancha Cancha, and Waran. Thank you very much for listening.